welcome back. Today I'm gathered with my friend Jordyn Jones.
Indeed.
Hello.
Hey.
I've known Jordyn for, 2 years now?
We have
Something
known
like
each other
that.
for 2 years.
3 years?
What are you talking about? It's been 6 months? 7 months?
Well, when you first came to the group, that was like a year or two ago, wasn't it? When I
No.
first met you.
I guess it was like a year ago. It was like a year ago.
Yeah, so about a year.
Yeah.
And you know how sometimes you meet people and there's something about them and it gets highlighted and you're like, what the heck is it about this person?
Really real. Very real.
I remember when I first met Jordyn, one of the first significant times we were on a bonfire back here, and it was really significant to me. He's one of those people that seems to have a relationship with Jesus that's figured out, and not in a heavy way or not a spiritually like oppressive way, but this is actually the joy of my life type of way, like legitimately application wise.
Real. And what I'll say about that is like, not to cut you up, but like, it's not figured out only because the Lord knows me, period. But like, I'm still learning Him and our dynamic. But yeah, I would be like, I would only add to that, like, yeah, your dynamic with anybody, you can figure out your dynamic with that person, and then you just develop that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord speaks to me, and our conversations have certain tones depending on the severity or the nature of what's happening. I know the tones with which the Lord speaks to me, and I just take whatever tone I have to Him, and He speaks to me whatever tone that He does. But I will say, like, that part's figured out. I don't want it to sound like I have the answers, because I really don't.
Behold the new Messiah, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just kidding.
I don't have the answers, but like, my banter with the Lord has a certain shade to it, and I just know that shade.
But that's what was so cool, because there's so many people that do all this religious posturing and peacocking, and they tout on social media, "Oh, I'm a Christian and I follow Jesus," and then I tip $0 to a waiter on Sundays, But the thing that was highlighted to me was the fact that there was no posturing. It was all, here's my story, here's what I'm going through, here's what God's talking to me about, here's what I feel like. And it just seeing what that relationship is like on the outside was really cool for me. It was very genuine. But I asked Jordyn to talk to me today because we were talking recently about, I guess your backstory a little bit, like where you came from, because you've lived a very different life than I have.
I think I've lived a very different life than most people. I had a friend in college. Literally, his parents were like, "You need to stop talking to this young man because he's a liar." And my friend was like, "Yeah." We went over to his house, and he's like, "Hey, don't be weird, but my parents think you're a liar." And I went, "What?" And he went, because all the stories." And then I went, "What do you mean?" And then he told me like 3 or 4 the things that I've told him that actually did happen to me. And he was like, "You see how like all of those don't make sense, considering you're not even 25 yet?" And I went, "Oh, I never thought about it like that."
Well, considering age.
So yeah.
Well, real quick, just to I guess lift him up a little bit. Jordyn's one of the, and I don't say happy like you just be happy, eat 25 candy bars because it makes you happy type of happiness. I mean, happy like life is really good type of people, I really appreciate that about him, and he sets a standard for not just excellence, but I guess holistic health from the perspective of understanding who he is, that even I want to aspire to. And he's super young, like
means a lot.
You're like 10 years younger than me, 12 years, something like that. But
something like that, yeah.
So like, did you? I always like to give people context, right? Because some people that I have on this podcast or video or whatever this stuff is that I do, some of them aren't Christians. Some of them like they just all walks of life. So like, what was that like for you? Were you raised Christian? What was your family life like? I mean, who were you 20 years ago, 10 years ago?
Yeah. So I was always raised like in and around churches, I think. What I want to say there is, I want to say 2 things. One, I'm not a believer because I was raised in the church, because at one point I had to find that for myself, and I'll explain that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But the second thing I want to say is yeah, I was, and just to honor my, especially my mother, but both my parents in that way, and to say, um, whether you believe or not, the Bible does say you train up a child in the way that they should go, and they will not depart. Um, my parents really did train me in terms of like know who you are. My mother would always say the phrase. She'd be like, even Jesus knew who he was. Um, she'd be like, yeah, you can be humble and you should be, but even Jesus knew who he was. Or, yeah, you got to turn the other cheek, but even Jesus knew who he was. Like you never. Um, it's not about. It's about being selfless, but it's not about making yourself nothing. Um, and so they always trained me well in that regard, and trained me well in terms of like rise, rise to what you can be, not what you are. Don't
Hmm.
settle into what you are, or don't settle into what people want you to be. So yeah, I was raised in church and raised well in that regard.
When you say they, did you have two parents, one parent?
Yes and no. So my father was in and out of jail most of my childhood, and then it was like it was one of three things. We say it like this: my father was either out of the house because he had gotten in trouble with my mother, doing things like cheating and
Hmm.
just scamming and scheming and other things. He was in trouble with the law, and then he was out of our house because he was in jail, or he was in our house doing something that inevitably would get him into one of those two situations. So, he's and I doubt he'll ever watch this, but I love my dad. He's not a great man all the time. He's not a great father all the time. Great fathers don't just bail out. He's not a great husband. Great husbands don't just bail out. But he is a good guy. Like he's a good guy, really smart guy, really cool dude to be around and to know. Um, it's just he doesn't do so well in certain situations, and I think that's because of the love that he was and was not afforded um, through his young life, and I understand that. But
Hmm.
so he was in and out, like really out. And then for me, especially for me and my younger brother, and then for my younger two siblings after that, I think he was around more. But still, he bailed out and has been bailed out now. We haven't seen him in a while.
Hmm.
So in that regard, it's like I was basically raised by a single parent.
Hmm.
My father was around enough for me to know him, but um, it wasn't always the best of times, even when he was around. So, mostly a single parent. My wonderful mother is a doctor. She has a doctorate in gerontology and um, like a master's in anthropology. So
Hmm.
it was always, I tell everybody, like, I learned the stages of grief before I learned my multiplication tables. Like, it's true. Um, and then at one point, my father managed a hospice house. So, like, growing up,
Your
it
dad
was,
did?
yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. He had done some stuff with hotels before, so like he knew how to run like a hotel type place, and it was just that for people who were dying or people's families were dying. So it was constantly being around morbidity. I think in a
Hmm.
weird way was a lot of what my childhood was. A lot of being around police and drama in that way. A lot of and then I was a smart kid, so when you're a smart black kid who doesn't have a lot of money, then they bus you over to like rich white people's school to like go to school with those kids or whatever. Um,
And where'd you go to school? Like, was
I,
it California?
well, I lived a lot of places. So I was born in California. Then we went out to Kentucky so my mother could go to grad school, get a doctorate. And then we lived in Baltimore for a period of time. Then we came out to North Carolina. Then while I was in school, I went to college in Southern California. So I went back to California for school. And then while I was there, they lived in Georgia. So
Hmm.
we kind of lived in Georgia for a bit.
Wow, so all over West Coast, East Coast.
Yeah, all over. We always just take road trips all the time, running from my dad's sketchy stuff, running to my mother's new jobs.
Did it always
Stuff
feel
like
like that when you were a kid? Did you identify that you were running from your parents' stuff?
No. It always just felt like the way I describe it, which is less. It's less true, but it felt that way. It's just we were always on the road. Like all we had was each other, and we were just always on the road. Like I remember we had a little box TV, which is the only TV I had for many years. And we would put the box TV in the back seat of a car, of like a Toyota 4Runner is what we had for the longest time. And we got a little thing that would like plug into the electrical socket of the
Hmm.
thing. And we'd
I
just be
remember those.
watching, yeah, we'd be watching Scooby Doo on a box TV in the back of the car, like me with my little brother in like a car seat. So it was just, it never felt like we were running from my pop's stuff. And typically when we moved, it was like for my mother, she had a new job or a new opportunity. And then it was leaving a lot of nonsense behind. So it felt less like running and more just like moving from place to place. Like it was just, we lived on the road and didn't make a lot of friends and sort of, like, not even in a bad way. It's just that you get used to it, and it wasn't like I wish I would have made more friends. No, I actually really liked how I grew up. I like popping in for like guest appearances on whatever sitcom, and then and you leave after like 4 or 5 episodes. It's pretty sick. So there was some of that just bouncing around place to place, but yeah, that's my childhood in a nutshell. A lot of nonsense. I was raised the right way through a lot of the wrong stuff, and as part of a unit, and understood what that meant. Yeah, I there's some nobility to how I grew up that I can't quite describe. Like it just felt like we were constantly on a righteous quest. Like it was cool. Like through all the nonsense, it was just like, continue to hustle until you're out of this situation.
Kind of reminds me of that movie with Will Smith, the one where he
Pursuit of Happiness.
Oh, that was such a good movie.
Yeah,
I loved it so much.
Very
Made me
much
cry.
that. I cry about that movie often. That is my mother and my experience.
Oh.
Like that's what it is.
What's your mom's name?
Dr. Shannon Matthews.
Shout out to Dr. Shannon Matthews.
Dr. Shannon Matthews. I love you, Doc. Yeah, Doc is the best.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was one of those things. Like my mother had her things. Every parent does, but I mean, she kept her kids from the voodoo. Like she kept us from the evil that was out there. That's crazy.
Yeah. So where did you guys finally settle?
We finally settled in North Carolina. I think we ended up here when I was like right before middle school. And then, yeah. And then we've just been here since vaguely. It's a little weird for me because I was here in North Carolina, but I went when I was like 14, 15. I was 14, right about to turn 15. I ended up going to boarding school in Durham. So, we couldn't afford it, but there's a boarding school. If you apply, it's free. You just have to get in Durham, North Carolina. So, I applied to that boarding school because I was like, this gives me the best chance at going to whatever college I want to go to. And
did you know what you wanted to do back then, or just
yeah.
I wanted to go to college?
When I was a kid, every kid says, like every other kid says, they want to be an astronaut, but I was dead serious. And it's only because I just wanted, I like to this day still, just want to see what the Earth looks like from outer space. I want to be able to look into the void too. Like it's just,
that's so spooky to me.
There's nothing. That's what space is black because there's nothing there. It's a void. Like that's the thing.
Did you ever see those space camps that people would go to?
Yes.
You get in a little thing that, I guess it's like all these little circles, and you get in the harness and you just spin.
Yes.
I always wanted to do that.
I always, you know how bad I want to go to space. We were so broke, and it sent me because I was like, I will never be able to afford space camp.
Feels.
But when I go to space, I'm gonna dunk on space camp. Like I'm gonna be like, ha ha, space camp, you prepared none of those kids, but I was prepared without it. Like I was so ready. And I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, get in NASA and find a way to go to space like that. But and because of that, I was like, I remember one time, and I'm so serious. We were sitting in the car, and my mother just looks at me because she was a college professor. She's now a dean at a university in California, but she was a professor, like first year, second year professor, and she just looks at me and goes, "Listen, Jordyn, I can't pay for your college." And I was a kid. It was wild. It was a good thing to say to me as a kid, but also it was just wild. I can't tell you, man. Like 10, maybe.
Okay.
She goes, "Jordyn, I can't pay for your college. I'm sorry. I should have started a college fund. I wish I could have. I just can't. So you got to find a way to get into school. You got to work hard. You got to get. We're in the car, like driving somewhere. She's like, you got to get a scholarship. That is how you will do it, and you will. But I'm just letting you know."
And did you receive that, or was it one of those things where it's like, oh crap?
Yep. I believe her saying that changed my destiny, because after that, then it was like, okay, find a way. Which is why I ended up in boarding school. I'm like, I want to be an aerospace engineer. I can't just go to some regular high school and can't just do whatever. I've got to go to the best school I can find. I've got to do the best at the best school I can find. and make it happen. And then I ended up going to boarding school, and then ended up getting into a research contest, going to NASA, hating it. And it was like, I can't do this. I was like, this is not my destiny. Like, literally, I remember being like, I'm going to do this research project, go present it. And then that'll be like, I'll know then whether or not this is it. Went to NASA, and literally I remember me and my friends who did the project. One of them's actually a genius, and he worked for NASA. Now he like works in private sector, aerospace engineering stuff. I don't think I'm allowed to say what he's doing. He's doing stuff with stuff that involves rockets.
Mm-hmm.
But he, like he was on that project. We went, but I remember we went there, presented our research, and then we just blew off the rest of the thing. Like they had events, like we blew it off and just went. We did putt-putt. We like went to the beach. We were at the Kennedy Space Center, like right around there for several days, and just were like, whatever.
That's
and
so crazy.
Being like, this isn't it. Like I went there and I should have been upset, and I should have been like, oh, my whole dream shattered. I was just like, nah, this isn't it.
It's crazy, man.
Cool.
Because like even back then, something that I hold really close to my heart that I can always fall back on is, I think it's Proverbs where it says, the heart of man plans his way, but it's the Lord that establishes his steps. And like, when I look at my life in hindsight, I can clearly see that, So like for you, so fast forwarding a little bit, you changed your major in your pursuit but thinking about your background, I think it's kind of interesting because people that live on the West Coast, when it comes to following Jesus, and when people that live on the East Coast, there's a completely different paradigm because here we're in the Bible Belt, especially if you're of a non-white demographic like you and I are. So, I think earlier you said, I'm not a believer because I was raised in church. What was that like for you? Because, you said that you've been moving around. Mm-hmm. Your father figure wasn't the most stable. Your mom was fighting hard, pursuit of happiness type thing. You ended up in North Carolina of all places. I can't, son, I can't pay for your college. You got to find a way. And then I guess sometime in your adolescent years, your whole life momentum going towards NASA was derailed. And it's like, what do I do now? So you're in this place. Like, I remember you saying that you kind of walked away from God as well. So what was that like for you in your younger years?
Well, I think I walked away from God when I was like young teenager. And it wasn't really like a walking away. I just was like, dude, I only hard commit. Like it's both a blessing and the unfortunate reality of my life that I just really don't know how to half commit. Like I'm not built that way. And so I was like, you know what, if I'm going to be a believer, like I'm really going to do this like I'm supposed to do it. But I need to know this is what's up. And so I just went to, when I tell you it was like I was on some major research project or something, I read the Bhagavad Gita, which is like a Hindu spiritual book. Like I went hard learning about Buddhism, hard learning about the Nation of Islam. Couldn't get my hand on. It's hard to get your hands on a Quran that you can like read.
Is it actually? I've never tried.
I mean, I don't speak anything other than English, and also I'm not converted or converting. So, we're in my quest as a preteen, trying to get somebody to give me a Quran or trying to find somewhere I can get one. And like for having, I was like, I can't get this Quran ordered to my house because my parents are doing big. What's going on?
Did your parents support your pursuit?
I didn't really talk to them about that. Yeah, other stuff was going on, especially then. I know exactly why, because then I remember being like, I think my father had just done some wild stuff, or like wasn't around, and I went, man, if he's on this wave, and I remember. Not even to come at my mom. It was just like, oh, dude, she's going through all this. My pop is like this. And they believe. Shouldn't that belief do something? Like, I'm like, what is it? What is the value in that? And it actually, my mother has grown a bunch. I just was too young to have seen that growth, right? Like you're only around your
Yeah.
parents for as long as you've been alive, and most of that you were a kid. So I think I've only really saw her as a human being for about a few years at that point. Like
Hmm.
really seen her as, oh, you're a person and you have feelings.
Oh yeah, it's so easy just to look at the crap.
Right. And so I was like super. I was judging her through her circumstance and not just appreciating what the Lord had done in her life. And um, I never asked her about her testimony. Like you only ask your parents. I think it's easy to only ask your parents like about the garbage. As
Hmm.
children, even now as an adult, like you call your parent, you're like, "You doing okay?" Expecting them to be like frail or sick or need your help somehow. No, do you ever ask your parents, "Man, what's going good? Has
Man,
God blessed you?
I,
Are you doing fine? Do you
I
have a
really
good
wish
time?"
I had done that because, like, I think about questions I would ask my mom now because my mom passed away from breast cancer in 2015. But, in my line of work, I ask people questions for a living. It's like
Yeah,
what I do with my life now.
yeah,
And I don't know. There was so much assumption that I did back then, just looking at the crap.
yeah.
And I wish I could go back and be like, what was this like for you? What were you thinking? What were you
Yup,
feeling? You know?
yep. My mother will tell you to this day. She's like, "No, you guys don't understand. Like I had you, and you guys were my testimony. Like I was supposed to be a mother because I had children. That's just what happened.
Hmm.
Uh, Keeping you guys alive was the quest, and it worked out pretty well. You're all doing pretty fine." And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like that. So it was a special time for me because I got to go through nonsense to do that. But even that, it's like I turned away from it, so I was just on a quest. So I read some of the
Hmm.
Quran as much as I could, and then just all kind of stuff, man. I was like, just to try and parse through it, right? My
Hmm.
theory was this, and now as a story writer, I'm like, oh, I understand more. What I was looking at was like a monomyth. My thing was, I learned enough about them to know every world religion, right? That's like major world religion, especially when touting like one god, even ones that tout other things out there, like little g gods. I was like, there's all some unity behind a lot of things that's happening here. If I can
Hmm.
trace the baseline story, then I'll know what the truth is. And so I just kept going further back in history, looking at it like a big timeline,
Yeah.
and working my way back through the beginning of every religious practice and figuring out where everything overlapped. Um, and I remember I had come to this thing of like, okay. So biblically speaking, there's a big G God that's above all the other spirits in the world, but there are spirits, right? So I was like, okay, that explains some like Taoist things and some other things that are out there. Um, Even if you look at what the original Buddha story is, it's an immaculate conception. Buddha is like formed of his mother's side, and he just comes to fruition. I was like, that seems quite weirdly like a parallel to a story that predates it, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, well, and just figured it out. Like, it sounds stupid, and people always want to go, you can't figure out the Lord. I mean, you kind of can. Like, we live on a timeline. Um, like God doesn't, but like humanity lives on a timeline.
Hmm.
If you trace that timeline well enough, I do think you see some of the truth in it. Especially when you look at the Bible and it's like, oh, a day with the Lord is as 1,000. And then you go, oh, wait, so I'm dealing with a different time scale. So in the creation of the world, it's not 7 days as I understand days,
Hmm.
right? So then you go, oh, well, there was a bunch of time where things were being created. Then you get people as we are now, like just people as we are now. And then you go, okay, well, what does it look like? Yada, yada, yada. Whatever. I traced it and been like, yeah, there's some metaphors and things that aren't technically, like, maybe not technically true. Maybe they are. Maybe I just wasn't around to see it.
Hmm.
Some stuff like that. But I basically figured it out, and I still was like, but that's wild, though. I couldn't have just timelined out and like cheat coded the truth. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, I couldn't have just been like, huh, I guess that makes sense.
Well, I'm curious. Like,
It felt too easy.
as you're going through this process, what was that like? Because you were in flux of, figuring out who you were
Yeah.
and reconciling that with my family and here's the crap that's going on. Plus, my parents are supposed to be Christians, but does their life actually have the
Yeah.
fruit from my perspective, from what I can see and what I've asked so
Yeah.
far? Because you were in your teens back then, right?
Yeah.
And you were also here in the Bible Belt where there's the expectation you're a Christian or you're going to hell.
Right, and you just gotta blindly believe.
Yeah, like you're talking about going through that timeline. That I'm part of that big segment of Christians where I've just there's a lot of the work that I've just not been asked to do. You know,
Yeah.
I just think it's so cool that you were going through that. But as you were doing that, did you get any flack from your parents or any like red flags of concern from your community or friends?
Um, I was a pretty lonesome guy. Like, like it's true. I had a I. So what I will say is, I'm I'm kind of falling in love with this woman, and she's been very clear. Like, lone wolves are bad. If you have friends, don't say you don't have friends. It's not like a cool thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would always like jokingly be like, I don't have friends. That wasn't even true then. I did have friends, but and I went to church. I just wasn't super close with anybody I went to church with in like a deep, deep way. No offense if like any of you are watching this. I didn't feel that close to them, and I didn't feel super close to anybody at school. And then, like our family unit was pretty tight knit, but I'm the oldest sibling, so it's not like I had any older siblings to go to who could talk to at my level.
Mm-hmm.
And then my parents were going through some other stuff, so I never sat down with them. It's like, hey, I'm having this big theological concern. I kept most of that to myself, and was like, you know what? Because my thing was this. It was like, if I can unravel this mystery and I can settle the truth within my own heart, then I'll be good. I don't need, which you do. You do need other people's testimony because like they're saying it works for them. It probably works, but maybe it does just work. Like test it, but.
Also, sometimes it doesn't.
Sometimes it doesn't. I was gonna say test it, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, you know what? It has to, like, this is my quest, is how I felt about it. And then it came into a head too, because one day I was outside and I was looking at my siblings playing or whatever, and I think it was my little sister like looked at me and just laughed super hard. And she was a little kid back then, and I looked into her eyes and I went, no, that is exactly where God is. You know what I'm saying? It was like, oh, there's definitely something beyond us to this. And once I settled that in my own heart, the truth just pointed to. I'm not necessarily huge on Christianity as a concept. Early Christians were called followers of the way. They were thought to be a cult. That is actually what I think is more of what believing in the Lord should look like, but not a cult, but a follower of the way rather than like Christianity. It's a very prescribed thing. As we've made it now, like in the 21st century.
It's very cultural, man. It irritates me.
Right. So I looked in her eyes and was like, no, there's something more here. And I just could feel it always in like subtle things. If you look, you'll find it. And it hit me like that. And then I went, well, the truth does point to the God of the Bible. That's a better way to put it. The truth does point to the God of the Bible, and being a follower of the way as the one that parses through everything else and makes it all fit. Like, I couldn't make everything else fit with any of the other ones. I just couldn't. And once it hit me like that, then I was like, okay, this is my quest now. So I think as a kid, it was like, that is why I am a follower of Christ, because I have done the research. I have tested it. Following the Lord and the God of the Bible, Yahweh, it works, and it does in my life precipitate the result that it says it will. Like it's a relational thing, and I grew into that part, but from a textbook thing, Bible's pretty it.
So let's dive a little bit more into the application, because after your adolescence and in your early adulthood, you hit some rocks.
Hit rocks. Kicked rocks.
You kicked rocks.
Yeah.
I think, and this is kind of the highlight where I felt like God was saying, you need to get Jordyn to tell this story, because you were telling me this story the other day.
Right.
And I was like, wow, because we all have moments in our lives that go unscripted and unrecorded, but they're significant,
Right.
And, like kind of like this thing right here, your story matters. Like, the reason that's such a big thing for me is because that's all we really have. It's our testimony. You can read tons of books, you can dress a certain way, you can buy a house, buy lots of cars, you can do lots of things. But really the most important thing you have is what you've been through, because that's all we're qualified for. So Jordyn was telling me about his old life. Because the Jordyn that I saw and the Jordyn that I espouse as a good person and that I appreciate and I think admonish is the word I want to use. I'm not quite sure. Exalt, whatever. The way that I tell people about him is he's really happy and he speaks from the place of a joyous relationship. And he was telling me how it wasn't always like that. And I couldn't really wrap my head around it.
Yeah. So all that it's good we talked about that other stuff sort of sets up things in like a way that's easier to understand. So I was at boarding school, yada yada yada, and I think there was a point in time where I had. I'm trying to parse through my own heart what I have permission to say and what I don't. So I had a deep relationship with a friend, and I cared about this friend a lot, and I was pretty in love with this friend. And I remember I had told them that I had feelings for them when they were leaving the state, and they were going to go to.
This was
state.
North Carolina still?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was in North Carolina. They were leaving to go out of state, deeper down south, and to go train for some stuff. And I was like, you know what? I really care about you, and I would like this relationship to have developed, and I should have told you sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of consensus that we both came to was like, it wasn't that it was necessarily too late. It was just I was about to go off to boarding school, and they were about to go where they were going to train. And we were like, okay, we're not going to do anything. And that was fair and fine and good, and that just was the choice that needed to be made, and that's real. But then they came to visit, and my roommate and them, my roommate and them had sparked up a relationship. And
man, love triangles.
Love triangles.
Hurts.
I lived with that man. Ridiculous. I love him to this day. Actually, I love him well to this day. But I had like been very honest with him, like, hey, I'm not going to tell you what you can and can't do, and I'm not going to tell you who you can and cannot, see romantically. But my friend's coming into town. I have a feeling that because I know you two both well enough that you're going to try it, that would hurt me a ton. And I don't want to be put in the middle of anything. So please don't do it from the place of it would hurt me a ton. If you must do it, just leave me out of it. And they ended up striking up a relationship. And then I sort of got put in the middle of it, and I had voiced my concern. I had been very clear, like, I don't want to be in the middle of this.
And how old were you at this time?
Who knows? I think it was near 16, somewhere around 16. 16, no, not even 17, like somewhere around 16, 17. But I was like, dude, it bothered me that I was sort of being put in the middle a little bit, and then I was like, no, don't do that. And then they honored that for a little bit, and then the friend who I had feelings for a long time, it sort of got into this head where we had a falling out about it. And we had a falling out about it because things were said as if my feelings were like had gone unsaid. And I was like, I voiced how I felt before. And you doing what you want to do is not something I can stop. I don't have, like, you have your own agency. But it does hurt me. I'm not going to lie about that. Like, I have feelings. I will acknowledge them. And I think it was the first time in my life that I really acknowledged my feelings. I think growing up the way that I did, it was a lot of, like, survive. Or I've got siblings. I've got to make sure are okay. Or I've got to help my mother make sure things are okay. And there wasn't a lot of space to say, oh, I feel this way. This hurt me. Or I need this kind of support, or, hey, like, do what you want, but I don't want to be party to it. There was never that. And how could there have been? So in that thing, it was my first step in being like, wait, I'm a person too. I should care about myself enough to voice how I feel.
Man, what awareness is this at 16? That's crazy.
Because I just had to swallow, like, those were pills I had to swallow, because I was like, wait, I could not say anything about this, but would that be right? It just wouldn't. And I think that it's less the awareness came from the fact that I question why you feel a certain way and why dealing with it X way is right or X way is wrong.
Yeah.
You can get very far doing that. And I was like, I feel like I should say something. Well, why is that feeling? Because this hurt me.
Now, is this something that was modeled for you, or were you just going through trial by fire?
I mean, I think it was a lot of trial by fire.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know how my mother would feel about this or how my siblings would feel about this, but based on what I've seen, it's been more I model sharing my feelings unequivocally, and have now the space has been more allowed for that, even in our familial dynamic. So, like, no. Because I remember there were times my father would say things about my mother like behind her back, and I was like, I don't like that. Or there were times where my mother would be feeling a certain way, and she would just keep it to herself. She'd be like, whatever, and want to just walk out of a situation. And I'm like, well, if you stay and talk about it, we can parse through it. Like, so I think it was the opposite of what was modeled for me. I knew there must be a better way. So then it was just trial by fire to figure out that better way. There were times where I would just shut down. I was like, that's not quite it. There were times where I would try to, like, not even in a terrible way, just like manipulate situations so I could voice my feelings. I was like, nah, that's not it. So it came from a lot of just trial by fire. And then, there's some biblical principles insofar as loving your neighbor as yourself. Well, that means you have to love yourself. Like, it just does. And I don't think I had gotten the fullness of that yet, but I knew well enough to be like, I would want somebody to tell me if they felt this way so that I could at least try to do better by them. So I'll tell somebody how I feel. Because there were a lot of times too where I think as a kid, my least favorite thing would be to hear that somebody had negative feelings about my behavior and just didn't say anything to me, or like get talked about behind my back. Because
That's the worst.
Yeah, it happened a bunch.
It's like, just have a conversation with me. Like,
right.
Do the relationship part. Don't just don't put a wall up and leave me on the other side. That's so hurtful.
Right. And I think there were times in my family where it had happened a little bit, not even to condemn them. Like, it just had happened where it'd be like, oh, I'd hear in passing, like somebody say something about how, mom and dad feel like you da-da-da-da-da. It's crazy that they didn't say that to me. But then also you got to think, like, I was constantly going to schools where I'm like a poor, round black kid in a lot of like rich white people's schools. So it was like I was constantly getting talked about behind my back.
Yeah.
It just, you start to figure out, like, that's just not it. So it was some of that. And I just asked in a way that was like, hey, listen, man, like, I can't deal with this.
And you're talking about your friends now?
My friend,
okay.
Yeah. My really, really good friend. And we had a falling out about it. Well, later on, I found out that she, for a while, was in a hospital, and she had an extraordinarily terrible car accident. Her car had wrapped around a tree. She had, like, flipped over several times, went off the side of the road. Well, we ended up seeing each other a little later after that, and we're driving in her car. And she's like, oh, there was... She told me the story about this woman in her life who just hated her just because she was doing her best. And she's like, yeah. So she pushed me to just look at myself and be like, oh, wow. A lot of people just hate me just because I'm doing what I do well. And she was training to be really high level at some things. And so it was like people just hated her for doing her and doing it well. And then she's like, and then I had no support. And, like, the one really good friend that I had, I turned to, and you had, like... We had this falling out, and you had basically been like, fuck you. So she was like, yeah, you were the reason I tried to commit suicide, which, none of us, I didn't know, like, and at that time, I don't think many people did. Like, the accident was just an accident. And we had sort of thought this car accident was just a car accident. Well, in that moment, then I have to reckon with the fact that, oh my gosh, my friend just tried to commit suicide.
So what'd you feel in the moment? Did you take responsibility for it? You think, wow, I caused this? Or was it just more a shock of, wow, that's what you think?
I think it was the initial shock because I had to realize, like, oh, that wasn't a car accident. You tried to flip off the side of the road, which is a wild thing to hear, like, for somebody to throw out as something in passing. And then it was like, please stop the car.
Because you were in the passenger seat.
I was in the passenger seat. And you already told me you tried to flip your own car. Please let me get out of this one. But on a real level, I started to have a panic attack actually. But I think,
Weren't you guys like in a cemetery or something?
yeah, I started to have this panic attack, and I was like, stop the car. And then she stopped the car, and then I got out, and then I started like walking just away from the car into the side of the road. And then I looked up, right, like I'm hyperventilating a little bit, and I'm look around, and there are a bunch of like gravestones. And then it just, I was like, what?
Oh, that's
and then
convenient.
I was in a cemetery, and then I looked up at her, and I was like, what? And we had a little bit of a conversation on the side of the road, but I think I knew in theory that telling somebody that is a terrible thing to say to somebody, and it is. To put that responsibility onto somebody is terrible. And if somebody had told me a story where somebody had said that they were the reason they tried to commit suicide, I'd be like, don't accept that onto yourself. Like, you may have done things that you'd regret or that weren't right or that you need to apologize for. You may actually be in the wrong here, but somebody going to commit suicide is not one person's fault in that way. I don't ever think I don't think it ever really is, but especially in the case of, it's not like you're bullying or tormenting this person. It's just you weren't enough for that person.
Or maybe you were the catalyst in a sequence of events.
And that's not something you should fully take on. And I knew that in theory, but when somebody you love says that to you, I think you go blind to the rationale behind it. Mm-hmm. And also, she's not the type of person who say things lightly. She will say things lightly that are dead serious, but she's not the type of person not to have given thought to saying that. So for me, I went, that's a sketchy thing to say to somebody, but you still said it anyway because you mean it. And as much as I know that's sketchy to say to somebody, that's how you feel. And that's how I made you feel, is how I internalized it. And I went, damn. And I think in that moment, I think something in me was irrevocably shaken. Like, in truth, it's not that there isn't redemption at the end of this. Sorry, I bumped into the mic. It's not that there isn't redemption at the end of this story, because there definitely is. But I think that's the moment I look to and I go, oh, my life changed forever in that conversation, in terms of how I would become the person I was supposed to become.
Yeah, so let's pause real quick. So you came from a background where you guys were all over the place.
Yeah.
You didn't really have a healthy perception of mother-father relationship or the relationship in general. You were on the struggle bus.
Yeah.
And then you decided, okay, I'm going to do this thing with my life. That kind of fell through because you were like, okay, I want to go do NASA, whatever. Nah, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. And then at the age of 16, you had this major, back then we called them crushes. Yeah. You had this crush, you had the mature conversation, you were in a love triangle, things happened. And then many years after the fact, a couple of years, I guess, you find out that this person that you were in love with said, I tried to commit suicide because of you. And so you're like in this series of events where it's like, what is life? Yeah. And all throughout that, you're also trying to figure out, is God real? Like, do I actually have a relationship? What am I gonna follow, if anything? You're like the agnostic pursuit of what the heck is going on.
Real.
And so now you're in this place where you're hit with a lot of humanity all at one time. Like, I was the result of somebody almost taking their life. Or the cause, I guess. And so, like, I'm just trying to picture what that's like, because, biblically we're supposed to be children of God, and we're supposed to be the salt of the earth and spreading joy. And here you are in this situation. I almost caused somebody to kill themselves.
Yeah. And yeah, I think, and at that point I assured myself that the Lord was real. It wasn't a real or not question. It was then like, I didn't understand the nature of the Lord wants to have a relationship with you and what that really means or looks like. So at that point it was like, I'm here on this earth to do things. Most of that is not be terrible. Then there's a bunch of very specific things I'm supposed to do. Yeah. And I was figuring those out. And I was like, well, trial by error. It's not go to NASA because this sucks and I hate it and I'm not very good at it. In that way. Like, I'm better than most. I'm not gonna. I got there. You know what I mean? So don't think this is one of those times where I'm about to say something stupid like, "Oh, I'm super dumb." No, but it just wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole upper echelon of genius that I'm not in that way. And so I was like, okay, I can't do that trial by error. And I think if I would have had an understanding then that the Lord wants to have a relationship with you and that you're just his child and that he really wants you to succeed, it would have been different. But my whole thing was just don't fail. And so I think something irrevocably was shaken in me in that conversation because I was like, oh, I failed. Like, this is the utmost failure. Not only have I been chasing NASA and that wasn't it, and not only have I, tried to be a good friend and do all these things that I think were valuable, but that's not it. But I failed at those things in extraordinary fashion. Like, I went all the way to NASA only to find out it's not the answer. I can't seem to be a good son. I can't seem to be a good brother. I can't seem to be a good friend, right? And now that's pushed to the nth degree. There's nobody I love more outside of my family, and it's off and on sketchy with them. And at that point, it was a lot of like, I think in each one of my siblings has had some tension with me at some point. I think I'm the oldest male figure in their life, familially speaking, so there's some of that. But there's just also like the older brother thing where it's like you want to take your older brother's head off. Like, I get it. I don't.
You're always
have
living
one.
in the shadow of your bigger brother,
right? And I was doing crazy things. Like, it's hard. My siblings are much more impressive than I am. Every single one of them, actually. But it's hard, I know, when you're like a preteen and you want to do, like, my brother does music now, but, and he's, he was at Berklee Conservatory, now he's in Berklee School of Music because the conservatory, he already knew everything. Like, he's a genius, but it's hard to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to write music or whatever, and then to be like, oh yeah, my older brother just presented at NASA and he doesn't even want to do that. That has to suck. I understood that, but it just was like, I was like, how can everybody in my life who I cared about the most, it felt like loved me the least. And that was some of what I internalized. But I'd internalized that because I felt like I had failed them. All of them. All of them. My best friend, my family, my roommates, my, everything. So that jumped me off to a point where I was like, oh, I'm just a terrible person. And I lived like I was a terrible person. And I don't say that like, I actually don't. A lot of people care so deeply about drug use. It's not a thing. Do what the Lord has called you to do. That's all I'll say about that. Or do what you feel like makes you comfortable and do it in a safe way.
Ooh, or the more relevant thing right now is live your truth.
Yeah, I will never say that. But do what makes you comfortable in a safe way, or do what the Lord has called you to do. And so, like, people make drugs and a bunch of other stuff. I've done a ton. I did a ton of stuff. Some stuff I can't even remember the name of. Like,
now, as you were doing that stuff, was it just searching for something, or was it just?
I don't believe in doing things. I don't believe in using substances to run from things, or even to run to things. I just needed to run. And people have done crazy drugs. Well, I think they'll understand what I mean, but if you do it to run from things, you're never going to run from that thing, and that thing will always catch you, especially while you're on substances, and it'll go sideways. And if you're trying to do it to run to something, you're never really going to find it. You're never really, really going to find it that way. But it was just a run. I just wanted some kind of freedom that I felt like I didn't have to escape from myself. And it was the easiest way to escape from self. And so I think I started doing a bunch of just LSD, acid, a bunch of other crazy cocktails. When you're around genius level teenagers, like super genius level teenagers, you get your hands on stuff that shouldn't exist. Stuff like that, I think I was big on not doing drugs until then. Did some of that. I was big on not only just not like sleeping with anybody, but I was like I had previously been very mindful of the romantic entanglements with which I got myself into. After that, I was like, I wasn't a player because I don't play games, but it was a lot of like being romantically involved with a lot of individuals. I was going on a ton of dates, ended up in a lot of intimate encounters, which I say with a smile on my face only because I look at my younger self through the lens of grace and I go, what are you doing? I didn't really revel in those experiences, but it was just stuff. It was stuff to do because I was like, oh, this is sort of what shitty people do. And from a place of self-judgment. Like, I was like, I'm going to live without intentionality because there's no reason I deserve to be intentional about what I'm doing. I just deserve to get what I get. Deserve to get what I get. And I live that way and not even to condemn living that way because it's not. I'm just telling you, I was only living that way because I had condemned myself. And I was just doing sketchy stuff that didn't make me comfortable. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you're in that lifestyle, I think there's a better way, but that's not to condemn you. I'm telling you, I was doing that because that made me uncomfortable. And I was like, I don't deserve to be comfortable. So it was my way of punishing myself and to escape myself. And so I did a bunch of stuff like that and then just turned into a terrible dude. Like, to people in my life. I didn't think those things made me terrible. Sleeping around, if you're doing that, I wasn't sleeping around. I was just, the reason I say that will be important later, but I wasn't sleeping around, but I was doing a bunch of sketchy things with folks. I was doing a bunch of sketchy substances. I was just getting into a bunch of sketchy activities, like breaking a lot of rules, doing a lot of things that were like vaguely illegal, and stuff like that. And I think it was those, like, why do we call them vices? It's because they hold you in a grip. I was just trying to hold it together, and I was using vices to try to keep a vice grip on my life. Like, that sort of thing is the best way I can describe it. And those things didn't make me could become worse. Condemning myself did. And so in condemning myself, I was just my heart hardened, and I was really mean to a lot of folks. And so I got to this point where I was like, all I do is hurt people, and that's how I felt, which is why I condemn myself. And then you go, I'm doing all these things to escape myself. Well, what's the ultimate escape? And if all I can do is to be terrible to folks, well, I'm just going to put an end to this. Like, maybe the best gift I can give anybody is just not to be here, because I don't want to be here, and it's very clear to me at that time, it felt that way, that nobody really wanted me to be there. And I was like, well, just end it to end it, right? Like,
when you had
let's
that
cancel the show.
revelation, was it more freeing or did it scare you?
I think it's a sketchy thing because I don't want to support anybody committing suicide because it's not the answer. But it was interesting because at that point I'd known God was real, and I had already decided, like, oh, the God of the Bible is real. So I'm like, I've accepted him as my Lord and Savior. Real talk.
And how old were you at this time?
This was like closer to 17.
Okay.
Yeah. Closer to 17. And I was like, okay, I know that now, and I had sort of worked all the way through that process of it. And I was like, okay, when I die, I'm going to heaven. So I'm not worried about anything else. I think what hit me was like the initial pain is gonna hurt people of knowing that I'm gone, but in time it will be better than it would have been if I would have stuck around. And I really sincerely felt that way. Which isn't funny, but I think I'm wrong. So it's funny to look back at a younger self and be like, wow, you really sort of wrong. You were actually accurately wrong. Like, there's nobody can tell me I was even half right. Like, I was very wrong. But I was like, you know what? It's gonna, in the long run, this is gonna be my gift to people. And nobody will see it that way out loud. But I was like, in their hearts, people are gonna feel that way. I know it. And I think that was the point where I started to contemplate suicide. I think I kept 2 razor blades in my desk and would just like fuck around with them all the time and be like, you know what? One of these days. I remember a few times I like had cut myself in other ways just to be like, well, can I endure the pain of like just slitting my wrist? I'm like, well, if it's just one time for the one time, might as well go hard. You know what I mean? Like,
That
whatever.
whole,
Metal.
if I do something, I commit.
I commit. I full commit. And so I was like, this metal is like, this is a metal way to go. I didn't want to OD because I had seen a dude on our campus that tried to OD, or had almost OD'd. I don't think he was actually trying to, but it almost OD'd, and it only like, you know, he was saved, but it caused like, you know, sketchy damage down the road, and he was still alive. And I'm like, got to make sure it's done.
It's kind of like Tom Hanks trying to hang himself on the island.
Right. Yeah. I was like, I got to make sure it's done because I'm not going to, me being half done isn't going to be it. And so I had, as a black dude, I would never, ever hang myself, just out of respect to those that came before me. It's never happened in that way. So it boiled down, and I was like, I'm just going to slit my wrist. It was literally like, it's not funny. It's not funny at all. But I had rationale behind why I was doing everything, which was actually crazy. I like rationale that is fairly sound if you don't understand the nature of the Lord. Like, and if you don't understand what life can be. Like, based on the information that I had at the time, I was like, yeah, I'm making good rational choices about this, and felt strongly in that. And so I was about to do it. And it was like, dude, I don't even know if it was the same night, but in my mind it is, because I remember I pulled out these razors and I was like, dude, this is like, it's either gonna be today or tomorrow or the next day. I had shot a short film about our community and just about a lot of the gentrification and stuff that was happening around us at the time. And I was like, well, once this movie's concluded, like it's all said and done. And so we had this screening of it, and I think it was like right around when we had screened this film, and I was like, okay, cool, my job is complete. Let me just wrap up a few loose ends, and then it's like time to go. And I remember we would have these things where people could visit your hall. And on one of those times...
Visit your hall?
Hall.
Hall. Gotcha.
Yeah, so everybody in this campus, they would have your hall would be open to everybody in the campus like one night every month or something. And so we had one of those, and I had everybody write a story. So I used to have this typewriter because people think it's cool to type on a typewriter. I was like, oh, if you're coming into my room, like it's something you can do. So I started this story, but like once upon a time, and then people kept adding to the story, and they wrote this terribly sad story about this kid who just had nobody and was like.
So people would come to your room and they would just add a line to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and so we were all kicking it, and like, you know, it was a good vibe in the room, but the story had like gotten dark, and I remember one person looked at me and went, "This story took a really dark turn, but okay." All right. And I went, "Yeah, I don't know where this came from." In hindsight, I think people were just digging on the spirit in the room. Like, it's true. People were picking up what I was putting down on the low key, like, for real. But everybody had typed that thing. And so I get this call on one of these days where I'm like, yeah, it's either it or like really close to it. And I wasn't making any cry for help is the thing. Like, you know, it wasn't one of those times where I was like, oh, I'm hanging around to just see if somebody cares. I was really just like, when I do this, it's a full commit. There's no turning back. So like, let me get everything I need to get in order. Let me write up, you know, type out, because I used to sit on this typewriter and I have a big journal where I'd kept all that stuff. And I was like, gonna write my like final goodbye. Not a suicide note, but like basically I was just gonna write like my final journal entry and like had a few other things I wanted to get out of the way. You know, because when it gets to the end, it's the end. And so I was like, well, time to finish this out. And I get this call from a friend of mine who I didn't even know all that well. I'm not even going to front. I think the reason we knew each other was like she had dated a young lady that I was currently dating or something. And we had like met in passing, and she was a friend of a friend. Is how we knew each other. And you know, now they go by they, them, and I want to respect that, or he, him, actually, I think, but and I won't say their name, but shout out, because you did the Lord's work and you saved my life. But saved my life. Just by being a cool person. But at that point they was she. So she hit me up and was like, hey, we need to talk. And I was like, what? What about? And she was like, no, like, we just need to talk. It's urgent. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to say, yeah, sure, I'll talk to you later. And then ended. So I was like, okay.
Like, what a crazy. I think the other day when you told me the story, you were like, it's not, I want to treat somebody, even if I'm going out.
Right. Even if I'm going out, what am I going to do? Lie to you? And then you find out 2 days later you couldn't have that conversation because I conked out. You know what I mean? Like, that would be sketchy. And I was like, I've been a shit person enough. I'm not going to lie.
I just think it's so interesting how, even though your whole self-concept was not great.
Yeah.
And it's like there was no consequence after the fact because you wouldn't be around. You had enough courtesy to the other person to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that to you. That's crazy.
Well, it was one of those things where I think I had been really shitty, like started to get really shitty to friends of, like, close friends of mine. I was just pushing people away hard. And because she and I, and it's actually cool because the Lord sent her for a reason, but it was because we weren't super close friends that I was like, I'm not just going to push away somebody who I like. I was pushing other people away because I knew we were that close. I was like, I'm not going to be an a-hole to you for no reason. Like, just because. Everybody else I was being an a-hole to, and out of the heart the mouth speaks. So my heart had hardened and gotten dark, and so I was speaking darkness and death and stuff. But it really was to push people away. Like, it was still purposeful at that time, even if the purpose was sketchy, it was still purposeful. I wasn't just going to be an a-hole, just be an a-hole. And so that's sort of where it was. I was like, well, yeah, sure, I'll oblige you this one last conversation. Like, for you, it's just a run-of-the-mill conversation. I'll have this, whatever. Because I was like, it's whatever for you, but I'm not going to be like, no. Especially if it's urgent or something. And I went to go talk with her, and she looked at me and went, hey, so while I was in your room, I read your journal. And I saw that thing that people had, or she didn't think that people had written it. She thought that I wrote it. So
you're talking about the story on the typewriter.
And so she goes, oh, I read the story in your journal about the kid. And I was like, I didn't even know what she was talking about at first. I was like, what? And then she went, Jordyn, I read your journal, and once I read that story, I then looked through the rest of the journal and I can hear it. And I didn't write the story, but the rest of the journal was edging that direction. And so it was interesting because the impetus for her to call me had nothing to do with me, but she was super right. And so she went, I know where that goes. Like, I know where that goes. I know exactly that tone. I know what you're saying. I know where this is headed. I'm going to tell somebody. Your folks need to know. A counselor needs to know. Somebody needs to know. I've got to do that. And I went, don't do that. Please don't do that.
Just real quick, I've had people in my life that were suicidal, and they got really upset at the concept that there would be, I guess the term is accountability, like telling the authorities or loved ones. It's like, and that's a big weight to put on people too. Like, hey, I'm going to commit suicide, but don't tell anybody.
It's true. And I understood that. And that's not even the point that I came from it with her with. Because I was like, I just can't. If living is difficult now, I cannot live a healthy whole life because there's no way they won't look at me through that lens forever.